The crowd recoiled as the switch was thrown. A sharp crack split the air. A flash of light. Then silence, heavy, unsettled, impossible to ignore. What they had just witnessed was not a magic trick or a stage illusion. It was electricity made visible. Powerful. Invisible. And terrifying. Few people realized it then, but this fear, this moment of hesitation, would decide the future of the modern world. In the late 19th century, America stood on the edge of a transformation it barely understood. Cities were choking on gaslight smoke. Factories ran on brute force and danger. Night belonged to darkness. And electricity, still poorly understood, promised either salvation or catastrophe. At the center of this uncertainty stood two very different men. One of them was already famous. Thomas Edison was the Wizard of Menlo Park, a national hero whose name filled newspapers and inspired confidence. He promised safe, controlled electric power, direct current, delivered block by block, wire by wire. Investors trusted him. Politicians listened. The public believed him. The other man was quieter. Less theatrical. More dangerous to underestimate. George Westinghouse did not seek attention. He sought solutions. Imagine him standing in a workshop, not basking in applause, but watching carefully, listening to machines, studying failure, asking why things broke and who paid the price when they did. Westinghouse had seen what innovation could cost when it went wrong. And he had decided early on that invention without responsibility was a kind of betrayal. Before electricity ever entered his life, Westinghouse made his name with air brakes on railroad trains. At a time when brakemen risked their lives leaping between cars to stop speeding steel monsters, Westinghouse saw something unacceptable. Too many dead. Too many mangled bodies. Too much indifference. He built a system that worked and then fought relentlessly to force railroads to adopt it. That fight taught him a lesson Edison never needed to learn: being right was not enough. You had to stand your ground against money, power, and fear. So when electricity began creeping into American cities, Westinghouse did not see wonder first. He saw danger. Wires stretched across streets like spider silk. Transformers hummed ominously. Accidents mounted. Newspapers ran stories of electrocutions, fires, unexplained deaths. Electricity was becoming a public menace long before it became a public utility. And this is where the storm clouds gathered. Edison believed electricity must be controlled tightly, kept weak, localized, obedient. His direct current system could not travel far. To power a city, you would need power stations every few blocks. Expensive, inefficient, but familiar. Above all, it felt safe. Westinghouse was drawn to a different idea: alternating current. Stronger. More flexible. Able to travel miles instead of feet. But AC came with a price. It was powerful enough to kill. The question was not whether it could light cities. The question was whether the public would ever accept it. Westinghouse understood this better than anyone. He knew fear could crush truth. He knew newspapers could turn innovation into horror. And he knew that if electricity was ever to serve humanity, it had to be made not just useful, but trustworthy. Behind closed doors, a war of ideas began to take shape. Edison warned of chaos. Of dead children. Of cities turned into slaughterhouses by reckless currents. His words carried weight. His reputation made them lethal. Westinghouse did not respond with slogans. He responded with resolve. He invested his own fortune. He hired engineers others dismissed. He listened. He tested. He failed quietly and corrected relentlessly. Where Edison sought control, Westinghouse sought systems. Where Edison demanded loyalty, Westinghouse encouraged argument. But the pressure mounted. Financial backers hesitated. City officials stalled. The public wavered. Every accident, no matter the cause, was blamed on electricity itself. And every death became ammunition. Few people realized how fragile this moment truly was. If electricity failed now, America would retreat into gaslight and steam. Progress would slow. Cities would remain divided between light and darkness. And the promise of a connected nation would die before it was born. Westinghouse stood at the center of that uncertainty, facing an impossible choice. Push forward and risk public outrage, financial ruin, even bloodshed. Or retreat and let fear decide the future. This was not just a battle of currents. It was a battle over who gets to define safety, who controls progress, and whether innovation should serve power or people. As the lights flickered uncertainly across America's streets, the storm was no longer approaching. It had already begun. And in the shadows, Thomas Edison was preparing to make electricity itself look like a weapon. The man collapsed before anyone understood what had gone wrong. There was no warning shout. No spark. Just a sudden stillness where movement had been moments before. The wire above him continued to hum softly, indifferent to the body lying below. Electricity had claimed another victim. By the late 1880s, accidents like this were no longer rare. They were becoming headlines. And in the growing battle over how America would be powered, every death mattered. Imagine standing on a city street as night falls. New wires stretch overhead, crisscrossing the sky. Arc lamps hiss and glare with an unnatural brightness. Some people stare in wonder. Others cross the street to avoid walking beneath them. Fear travels faster than light. George Westinghouse saw both reactions and understood what they meant. Electric power was no longer just an engineering problem. It had become a social one. A political one. A moral one. While Edison expanded his direct current system block by block, Westinghouse pushed toward something far more ambitious. Alternating current could carry electricity across long distances, allowing power to be generated far from crowded cities. It was efficient, elegant, revolutionary. And to Edison, it was unforgivable. This was not simply about wires and volts. It was about control. Edison's system required constant infrastructure, power stations every mile, massive investments, a web of dependence that placed him at the center. Westinghouse's system threatened to tear that web apart. One power plant could serve an entire city. One decision could make Edison's empire obsolete. The age of invention had turned ruthless. Edison understood public fear better than most. He had helped create the myth of the safe, benevolent inventor. Now he used that myth as a weapon. Newspapers began to run chilling stories. Graphic descriptions of deaths caused by high-voltage currents. Warnings about deadly electricity unleashed without restraint. The message was subtle but relentless: alternating current was not progress. It was peril. Behind the scenes, Edison's associates took the campaign further. Animals were electrocuted in public demonstrations to prove a point. The current used was always alternating. The implication was clear: this was the kind of power Westinghouse wanted to put into your home. Few people knew how orchestrated it all was. Fear, when carefully directed, could look like common sense. Westinghouse watched this unfold with a mixture of anger and restraint. He refused to retaliate in kind. No spectacles. No propaganda. Instead, he focused on building safer systems, transformers that reduced voltage, insulation that minimized risk, standards that did not yet exist. But safety was expensive. And fear was profitable. Investors grew nervous. City councils delayed contracts. Insurance companies raised rates. Every newspaper headline tightened the noose. Westinghouse Electric was growing fast, but it was also bleeding money. And yet, he pressed on. Those who worked for him noticed something unusual. Westinghouse listened. Engineers argued openly in his offices. Mistakes were admitted, not hidden. When accidents happened, he demanded explanations, not scapegoats. Few industrial leaders behaved this way. To Westinghouse, invention carried responsibility. If people were going to trust electricity with their lives, he had to earn that trust honestly. Meanwhile, Edison crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. When the state of New York sought a more humane method of execution, Edison's circle quietly suggested alternating current. The logic was cruelly precise. If AC could be associated with death in the public mind, Westinghouse's system might never recover. The electric chair was born not from mercy, but from strategy. Westinghouse was horrified. He funded legal challenges. He paid for experts. He argued that electricity should never be turned into a symbol of terror. His protests failed. The first executions went forward. The headlines were brutal. The images unforgettable. AC now had a new nickname, the executioner's current. Imagine knowing that your life's work, meant to bring light and safety, was being used to kill. The pressure became unbearable. Banks tightened credit. Partners whispered doubts. Competitors circled. Edison's influence seemed everywhere, shaping perception, rewriting reality. Yet even now, Westinghouse did not retreat. Instead, he doubled down on engineering. He believed that if AC could be made unquestionably safe, undeniably reliable, fear would lose its grip. Truth, he hoped, would outlast spectacle. But time was running out. The public was choosing sides without understanding the science. Cities hesitated. Contracts slipped away. And Westinghouse Electric teetered on the edge between triumph and collapse. One decisive test remained, one opportunity so vast it could either vindicate him completely or destroy everything he had built. As the nation prepared for a grand public spectacle meant to celebrate progress itself, George Westinghouse faced the greatest gamble of his life. And this time, there would be no shadows to hide in. The lights went out without warning. One moment, the street glowed with harsh white brilliance. The next, darkness swallowed everything. A scream followed. Then another. Somewhere, glass shattered. In the confusion, a fire ignited, small at first, then racing along a line of poorly insulated wire. By morning, the newspapers would have a story. And by evening, George Westinghouse would feel the weight of it. Few people realized how fragile the electric cities had become. Wires were strung quickly, often carelessly, by competing companies racing to claim territory. Safety standards were vague. Training was inconsistent. When something failed, electricity took the blame, no matter whose system was responsible. Fear spread faster than facts. Imagine living in a city where progress hums overhead, invisible and unpredictable. You hear stories of linemen falling from poles, of horses collapsing in the street, of children warned not to touch metal railings after rain. Electricity was no longer just light. It was threat. And Thomas Edison understood the power of that fear. He did not need to invent new dangers. He only needed to amplify the existing ones. Every accident became proof. Every fire, a warning. His allies in the press framed alternating current as reckless force, wild, untamable, indifferent to human life. Direct current, by contrast, was presented as civilized. Gentle. Moral. The narrative stuck. Westinghouse watched as his name was pulled into stories he did not control. His system, still unfamiliar to most Americans, became the villain in a drama written by others. The truth that many accidents occurred on Edison's own DC lines rarely made the front page. This was not a fair fight. Yet Westinghouse refused to retreat into bitterness. He focused instead on what he could control, the integrity of his work and the people behind it. Inside his factories, pressure mounted. Engineers worked long hours refining transformers, improving insulation, reducing voltage where people lived and raising it only where machines could handle it. Each improvement cost money. Each delay threatened contracts. Workers worried. Paychecks depended on public trust, and public trust was slipping away. Westinghouse addressed them directly. He spoke plainly. He admitted risks. He demanded care. He reminded them that every decision they made carried consequences far beyond the factory walls. This was not about winning a rivalry. It was about earning the right to change how people lived. Leadership, for him, meant accountability. But outside those walls, the war escalated. Cities passed new regulations, often written by those who barely understood electricity at all. Insurance companies refused coverage for AC systems. Politicians, eager to avoid scandal, leaned toward the familiar name they already trusted. Edison's influence loomed everywhere, subtle but pervasive. Yet even Edison began to sense something slipping beyond his control. Direct current struggled to meet the growing demands of expanding cities. Power stations multiplied, but so did costs. Efficiency suffered. The very safety Edison promised came with limits that could not be ignored forever. Westinghouse saw this clearly. Alternating current was not just cheaper. It was scalable. It could power factories, streetcars, entire neighborhoods from a distance. It could shape the future in ways DC never could. But vision alone could not extinguish fear. Then came the fires. Electrical blazes erupted in crowded districts, often caused by rushed installations or outdated wiring. Flames climbed walls and leapt rooftops. Each fire fed the same narrative: electricity was dangerous, and stronger electricity was deadly. Westinghouse knew that one catastrophic incident, one mass tragedy tied unmistakably to AC, could end everything. He tightened standards again. Slowed expansion. Refused deals that cut corners. Every refusal hurt financially. Every delay gave Edison more ground. Some investors urged compromise. Others urged retreat. Westinghouse did neither. To those closest to him, he admitted his doubts. He questioned himself late at night, reviewing diagrams, reading reports, imagining worst-case scenarios. The burden of responsibility weighed heavily. If he was wrong, the cost would be measured in lives. And yet, the alternative was surrendering progress to fear. The rivalry had become more than personal. It was philosophical. Should innovation be restrained until it feels safe, or pushed forward until it becomes safe through mastery? Edison believed control meant limitation. Westinghouse believed control meant understanding. As public anxiety peaked, a new opportunity emerged, one so public, so symbolic, that it would force a decision. A moment where electricity would be judged not by rumor or rhetoric, but by performance under the brightest lights imaginable. The stakes could not be higher. For Westinghouse, this was no longer about defeating Edison. It was about proving that power, when guided by responsibility, could illuminate rather than destroy. And the world was about to watch. At dusk, the city held its breath. Gas lamps flickered weakly along the streets, their yellow glow already familiar, already fading into obsolescence. Above them, new wires stretched from pole to pole like a challenge written across the sky. Somewhere in a power station, a hand hovered over a switch. If this failed, everyone would see it. Few moments in history have carried so much weight in such quiet anticipation. The future of the American city, its nights, its factories, its rhythm of life rested on currents no one could see. George Westinghouse understood this better than anyone. He was no longer just competing against Edison. He was competing against doubt itself. As cities grew denser and louder, electricity became essential. Streetcars needed power. Factories demanded longer hours. Storefronts wanted brighter displays to lure customers after sunset. Whoever controlled the current would shape urban life. This was not a theoretical debate. It was a land grab. Contracts were signed in backrooms. City councils were courted with promises and warnings. Newspaper editors received quiet visits. Public demonstrations were staged not just to inform, but to persuade. Edison's name carried authority. His direct current system had already lit parts of New York. To many officials, choosing Edison felt safe politically, socially, personally. Westinghouse arrived without that comfort. He brought charts instead of celebrity. Engineers instead of showmen. And a system that demanded trust before it delivered reward. Imagine being a mayor, staring at two proposals. One comes from a man the public already worships. The other promises more power for less money, but carries a reputation, fair or not, for danger. The decision is not just technical. It is personal. If something goes wrong, your name will be attached to it forever. This was the battlefield. Westinghouse did not promise perfection. He promised preparation. He spoke of substations placed far from neighborhoods, of voltages transformed before entering homes, of safety not as an afterthought, but as a design principle. Some listened. Others did not. In city after city, the war played out differently. In some places, Edison's DC systems spread first, quickly saturating streets with short-range networks. In others, Westinghouse's AC lines arrived quietly, stretching miles from distant generators, threading power through neighborhoods without drawing attention. Few people realized what was happening above their heads. That two philosophies of progress were being tested in real time. When accidents occurred, the blame came swiftly. A lineman electrocuted. A warehouse burned. A street plunged into darkness during a storm. Each incident became a story, shaped and reshaped before it reached the public. Facts bent easily under pressure. Westinghouse felt every one. He visited sites personally. He read reports late into the night. He demanded investigations, not excuses. When his company was at fault, he accepted it. When it was not, he fought back quietly, methodically. Edison fought differently. He warned city leaders that alternating current was an invitation to chaos. He framed the debate as one of morality. Safety versus recklessness. Order versus experimentation. His words echoed in council chambers and editorial columns alike. It was effective. But even Edison could not escape the limits of his system. As cities expanded, DC infrastructure multiplied like weeds, costly, inefficient, difficult to maintain. Power stations crowded neighborhoods. Maintenance crews worked constantly to keep systems alive. Westinghouse's networks, once established, proved resilient. Power flowed steadily over long distances. Factories ran smoother. Streetcars moved farther without interruption. Quietly, the results spoke. Still, fear lingered. Parents warned children not to touch metal fences. Workers demanded hazard pay. Insurance adjusters circled like vultures. Electricity had become both necessity and menace. Westinghouse carried the weight of that contradiction. He believed the city of the future could be brighter, safer, more humane. But belief alone did not protect lives. Every decision, where to run a line, how much voltage to allow, which materials to trust, carried irreversible consequences. This was the cost of leadership. Behind the scenes, his finances strained. Expansion demanded capital. Legal battles drained resources. One wrong move could trigger collapse. Edison's empire was vast. Westinghouse's was vulnerable. Yet momentum was shifting. In certain cities, officials began to notice something difficult to ignore. Westinghouse's systems were working. Not flawlessly, but reliably. And reliability, over time, builds confidence. The war for the American city was far from over. But as night fell and electric lights began to outshine gas across growing neighborhoods, the question was no longer whether alternating current could work. It was whether the old order could stop it. And on the horizon, a single event loomed, an opportunity so visible, so public, that it would force America to choose which current would define its future. The condemned man was strapped into the chair as the witnesses looked away. Some covered their eyes. Others leaned forward, compelled by horror. A switch waited to be thrown. A current waited to be unleashed. What followed would not only end a life, it would shape how a nation felt about electricity itself. Few people understood the weight of that moment. The electric chair was introduced as progress. A cleaner, more humane form of death, the state claimed. But behind the official language lay strategy. The current chosen was alternating current. George Westinghouse watched from a distance, sickened. This was not what he had built electricity for. When the first execution went wrong, when the body convulsed, when the process dragged on longer than promised, the newspapers spared no detail. Words like violent, burning, agonizing filled the pages. And again, the same association was made. This was the power Westinghouse wanted to bring into homes. Public opinion shifted sharply. Imagine being an ordinary citizen, reading these accounts by gaslight, hearing whispers on the street. Electricity, already feared, now carried the image of state-sanctioned death. No technical explanation could erase that picture. Westinghouse acted. He funded legal challenges, arguing that using electricity this way was cruel, unethical, and reckless. He hired experts to testify. He wrote letters not as an industrialist, but as a man pleading for restraint. He knew the fight was likely unwinnable, but silence would have been complicity. Edison did not attend the executions. He did not need to. His influence was already woven into the outcome. He distanced himself publicly while his campaign achieved its goal. Alternating current was now inseparable from fear. The rivalry had crossed into moral territory. For Westinghouse, the pressure became suffocating. His company faced mounting debts. Banks hesitated. Investors questioned his judgment. Why continue defending a system now linked so closely with death? Inside Westinghouse Electric, tension grew. Engineers worried about layoffs. Families depended on decisions made far above them. Every setback rippled outward. Yet Westinghouse refused to abandon his principles. He tightened safety standards again. He demanded clearer insulation, stricter procedures, better training. Each improvement cost money he barely had. But he believed that if electricity was to be trusted, it had to be better than what came before, not just cheaper. Public fear did not fade easily. Newspapers continued to frame the narrative. Sensational headlines sold copies. Politicians repeated talking points. Insurance companies refused coverage. It felt as if the entire system was aligned against him. And still, the lights stayed on. In cities where alternating current had already taken hold, people noticed something subtle. Their streets were brighter. Their factories ran longer. Their power did not fail as often. Slowly, quietly, experience began to challenge fear. Few people realized how close Westinghouse came to ruin during this time. Lawsuits piled up. Credit tightened. His personal fortune was tied to a vision the public no longer trusted. He could have sold out. He could have merged. He could have walked away wealthy and intact. Instead, he stood his ground. To Westinghouse, electricity was not a weapon. It was a responsibility. And responsibility, once accepted, could not be abandoned simply because it became inconvenient. Edison, too, felt pressure. Direct current systems strained under demand. The cost of expansion rose. Power stations crowded city blocks. Efficiency lagged. Even loyal supporters began to question how long DC could keep up. The war had reached a stalemate, fear against function, image against reality. Then, a new opportunity appeared. Not a courtroom. Not a city contract. But a national stage, one that promised spectacle, pride, and progress. An event meant to celebrate America's future before the eyes of the world. For Westinghouse, it was a final chance to change the story. If alternating current could shine there brilliantly, safely, undeniably, public opinion might finally turn. But if it failed, the association with death would become permanent. As preparations began and deadlines loomed, George Westinghouse faced the most dangerous gamble of his life. And this time, there would be no second chances. At exactly the appointed hour, a signal was given. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the darkness broke. Light surged across the grounds in a rolling wave, white, brilliant, and steady. Towers, walkways, fountains, and facades flared to life at once, not with a flicker, not with a stutter, but with a confidence that took the breath away. The crowd gasped. Then it cheered. Few people in that moment knew whose power they were witnessing. They only knew they had never seen night conquered so completely. Imagine standing there, surrounded by tens of thousands of others, as the sky itself seems to glow. Shadows retreat. Faces sharpen. The darkness that had ruled human evenings for centuries is suddenly pushed back by an invisible force, disciplined and obedient. This was the moment George Westinghouse had gambled everything on. The World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago was meant to celebrate progress, industry, and the promise of a new century. It was a showcase for America's confidence. And behind the scenes, it had become the most important battleground in the War of Currents. Edison wanted it badly. So did Westinghouse. The contract to light the fair was worth prestige more than profit. Winning it meant legitimacy. Losing it meant surrender. Edison's company bid high, confident that reputation would carry the day. Westinghouse bid lower, much lower. It was a risk bordering on recklessness. His company was already strained. But he understood something Edison did not. This was not about money. This was about proof. The fair demanded power on a scale never attempted before. Thousands of lights. Miles of wiring. Perfect reliability. Any failure would be witnessed by the world. Alternating current made it possible. Direct current did not. When Westinghouse won the contract, the backlash was immediate. Critics called it irresponsible. Newspapers predicted disaster. Rumors spread that the fairgrounds would become a death trap of wires and fire. Behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. Engineers worked through the night. Every transformer was tested and retested. Every connection inspected. Safety protocols were drilled relentlessly. There could be no mistake. Not one. Westinghouse walked the grounds quietly, watching, listening, absorbing the tension. He spoke little. He trusted his people. He trusted the system they had built together. Still, the night loomed. When the switch was finally thrown, the result was undeniable. The lights did not merely turn on. They transformed the city. Buildings shimmered. Water reflected brilliance. The fair became a vision of the future made real. And nothing went wrong. No fires. No panic. No bodies in the street. Just light, stable, overwhelming, beautiful. Public fear faltered. Newspapers that had predicted catastrophe now printed awe. Visitors wrote home in disbelief. Electricity, once associated with death, now carried wonder. Children stared upward. Adults lingered long after sunset, unwilling to leave the glow. Edison watched from afar. He did not attack openly. He did not need to. His influence remained vast. But for the first time, it was clear that the ground had shifted beneath him. Westinghouse had not just powered a fair. He had changed the story. Few people realized what this night meant. Not just for electricity, but for how progress would be judged from then on. Performance had defeated rhetoric. Experience had undermined fear. Alternating current was no longer an experiment. It was a reality. And yet, victory came at a cost. Westinghouse's company had spent heavily. The low bid left little margin. Financial strain deepened even as reputation soared. Success did not erase danger. It sharpened it. Now everyone wanted what he had proven possible. Cities demanded contracts. Factories sought power. Competitors circled. Edison's allies regrouped, looking for new angles, new arguments. The war was not over. But the night had chosen a side. As the fair's lights burned steadily against the darkness, George Westinghouse stood at a crossroads. He had won the most visible battle of his life. The question now was whether he could survive what came next. The turbines roared as water crashed through steel gates. A river, ancient and indifferent, was being bent to human will. Mist rose into the air. The ground trembled. And deep inside the generators, invisible currents surged outward, traveling farther than any electric power had ever gone before. This was no exhibition. This was real. Imagine standing near the edge of Niagara Falls, feeling the force of the water and knowing that its power was no longer wasted. It was being captured, transformed, sent miles away to light streets, drive machines, and reshape entire cities. For George Westinghouse, this was the moment when theory became destiny. The success at Chicago had changed everything. Alternating current was no longer on trial. It was in demand. And nowhere was that demand greater or more dangerous than here. Harnessing Niagara meant confronting scale, risk, and skepticism all at once. The distance alone seemed impossible. Critics warned of failure. Investors worried about losses. Engineers argued fiercely over design. Westinghouse listened. He always had. He assembled teams that challenged him. He backed Nikola Tesla's ideas even when others dismissed them as impractical. He accepted uncertainty as the price of progress. But this project carried consequences beyond business. If Niagara failed, the victory at Chicago would be dismissed as spectacle. Fear would return. Doubt would harden. Edison's supporters would claim vindication. And Westinghouse knew something else. If it succeeded, there would be no turning back. The turbines began to turn. Power flowed outward, carried by alternating current across distances once thought unreachable. Factories came alive. Streetlights flared. Entire communities felt the impact almost instantly. It worked. Not because it was flashy. Because it was reliable. The war that had once dominated headlines now faded into something quieter and more decisive. Cities chose AC not out of loyalty, but necessity. Direct current lingered in pockets, but its limitations were undeniable. Edison adapted. He always had. His companies shifted. His legacy endured. The rivalry, once fierce and personal, settled into history's long view, two men driven by different visions, both shaping the world in their own way. Westinghouse never claimed victory. He rarely spoke of triumph at all. He remained what he had always been, an engineer at heart, focused on systems, on people, on responsibility. He believed power should serve society, not dominate it. Yet success carried a hidden cost. The strain of years of conflict, of financial pressure, of relentless expansion took its toll. The very industry Westinghouse helped create grew faster and more ruthless than he was comfortable with. Corporate consolidation tightened. Control shifted. Innovation became harder to steer. Eventually, Westinghouse lost control of the company that bore his name. Few people realize how often history rewards vision by taking away ownership. He did not die wealthy by the standards of the empire builders around him. He did not dominate headlines in old age. He did not seek monuments. What he left behind was something quieter and far more enduring. Imagine standing in a city at night today. Lights stretch to the horizon. Homes glow. Streets pulse with life. Factories hum. Hospitals operate without pause. Distance no longer matters. Power flows where it is needed, when it is needed. That world runs on the current Westinghouse fought for. Not because he was louder than Edison, but because he was willing to be patient. Because he chose responsibility over spectacle. Because he believed that the future should be built not on fear, but on trust earned through proof. The first tech war ended without a treaty. No surrender was signed. But the outcome is written in every wire overhead, every transformer on a pole, every city that never truly goes dark. And yet, the story does not end there. Because the questions Westinghouse faced about power, control, ethics, and responsibility are still with us. They return every time a new technology promises to change the world. The current may have chosen its side. But the struggle between progress and restraint never truly does.